Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all I want to thank to Martin Nietzsche for the organization of this very interesting conference, and also the president of SOPHERE, many thanks for cooperation, and also to the host of this conference, the Czech Academy of Sciences. Many thanks. Let me begin with the main thesis, which states that the religious is necessarily located at the crossing point of the imagination on the one side and the experience on the real on the other. However, in order to verify this thesis, we first have to analyze what we understand when we speak about the imagination and the real. And in doing so, we can formulate three sub-theses. The first of these sub-theses claims that the experience of the religious has to do with an absolute borderline within the ability of my living body. My body is the all-embracing medium by which I act within reality. I am centered within my body. I am living the absolute here, the zero point of my bodily existence, as Husserl has already stated. Throughout my life, I cannot leave my body behind. At the same time, I am not locked in my corporeal behavior. On the contrary, I relate to other things and persons by means of my bodily corporeal facticity. That is, I am not only that zero point, but am, in Husserl's words again, a zero point for all orienting of my acting. That means I relate to whatever, always from the hic et nunc, as demarcated by my bodily corporeal zero point, and I am only living this centered position in the way that I refer to this and that. To realize my orienting capacity is not a complex of neutral movements. I refer to all what is not my own in the basic way that I have an interest in it. I want to get or to possess it. Desiring is a fundamental structure of my orienting activities. In living with desire related to objects, one has to reckon with the case that something may resist. There is something real that prevents me from reaching the object of my desire, and in most cases, it may be some things, in fact, concrete circumstances, which hinder me from realizing the goal of my tendencies. However, it may come also to the extreme experience of a resistance, which gives rise to the impression that I'm totally overwhelmed. Obviously, only such an experience of powerlessness may strongly interrupt my desiring, so that my normal tendency to grasp this or that comes to a standstill. Is such an interruption the core of a so-called religious experience? If so, then this experiencing opens up from movements of our bodily corporeal existence. In order to explain these movements further, we can distinguish three steps. First one, the embodiment of our living body. This tautological expression distinctly describes the fact of the zero point of bodily corporeal existence. To be embodied in and by one's own bodily existence is perspectively organized, and such embodiment determines all kinds of existential movements. The fact that the zero point for all orientations is a bodily existence embodied in itself and perspectively organized can be described as an original mode of egocentrism. It is a very basic kind of the egocentric, since it is unavoidable and in this sense natural. We cannot avoid the fact that we are born and grow up into such a state of being centered in ourselves and relating to our environment in the perspective of our central existence. The egocentrism is the carriageway, so to speak, the shipping lane for desiring and grasping this or that. And of course, the egocentric style does not dissolve when its tendency is interrupted by meeting with the real, with such that resists us. The second point, from a young age we have the experience that reality or real things resist us. But we also have from time to time the experience that there is nothing that resists. In the retreat of resistance, we learn that there is an emptiness, a void of being able to. This vacuum in the absence of resistance structures the movement of desire, creating a not yet. It literally gives time and space to my tendencies, and such a creation is both the result and evidence of an operating imagination. One can say that this vacuum becomes a place of imagination, or imagination is occupying the emptiness caused by the receding real. And the third point, now let us take the case that we are seized by the big real, the absolutely unavailable. We are not helplessly at its mercy. We do not get rubbed out by the real because we have the airbag of our imagination. We can try to make the unavailable available. That is, to domesticate it, to bring it home to us. Of course, there is an inner connection between the development of religions and modes of human settlement. But in doing so, we include the religious in our egocentrism. Is this the only alternative? To be at the mercy of the superior powers, or to reduce them to our egocentric attitude? Regardless, we can formulate our second sub-thesis. Religious experience moves between two poles, between our egocentric tendency and a reality that absolutely transcends us. We can discuss this second sub-thesis when we analyze more deeply the role imagination plays in view of the unavailable. In order to live, Nietzsche stated in his Birth of Tragedy, in order to live, the Greeks had to create their gods. In this context, Nietzsche also speaks about a middle world. These short remarks contain a double hint. First, the constitution of what we call world or life world is a product of our imagination. By constituting this world, we react to the resistance suffered as a result of the overwhelming real, and we react in such a way that we make a tableau of images of what is really unavailable, but actually available in the cosmos of such imagination. This tableau, or this cosmos, is, secondly, the world of the middle, and is so in a double sense. It is not only just between me and the real, but it settles itself down as a realm in itself. It has a tendency to become absolute, a total medium, a world. I'm now living within this social medium, I am being in the world. Insofar as I am reshaped in the world, my bodily corporeal 0 point is transformed without, however, being dissolved. Thus I am living two modes of being in, even then when I am settled in the world. I remain as this individual, asocially separated animal that is indissolubly bound to his or her 0 point, centered in his/her bodily corporeal existence, and I am at the same time in a world I share with others. However, when I am indissolubly bound to my bodily corporeal, my original being in, and when this being in is a starting point of all my activities, of my tendencies, intentions, in one word, of my desire, then the being in number 2, the being in the world, is a result of the movement of desiring intentionality. Desiring forms the net that carries the imagined social world. It is the original power that keeps it moving. This network and its product, the social world, are linked by the individual, separated human beings united in dispute and understanding over an object. Desire is a basic force that builds worlds by means of imagination. In failing because of the resistance and the superiority of the real, it saves itself in the expansion of a world so that its tendency terminates superficially in the construction of such a world in time and space. In this way, the unfolding of the world is not only the reaction to the resisting real, but also becomes a place where the relationship to the overpowering will be realized from now on. For this performance of the imagination based on desiring tendencies or building a world in time and space and upsetting the real into the imaginative, I will give 3 examples. And all these examples refer to the temporalization of the real. Painted walls in prehistoric caves are probably one of the first human attempts to domesticate the real by including it into a performing world, a resulting screen of images. The animals in nature, as well as the cave wall, are real things, and both resist my attempts to make them submissive. However, imagination and its materialization in real pictures can outwit the resistive force of reality. The animal is controllable where I draw it, and the wall becomes transparent where I paint it. Imagination subjects the real by overwriting it with its means. This leads to 2 important observations. First, in presenting the wall or looking at its pictures, I am the subject that is living its bodily corporeal 0 point, and at the same time I am living in the world depicted in the picture. That means I am living my being in 1 and being in 2 simultaneously, but the second one has superimposed the first one. And still more than that, by means of this picture world, I am able to refer to the animal in reality. And insofar as this animal is not yet actually here in the cave, I can refer to such that does not exist in the hic et nunc. I can extend the time into the present environment and also into the future and the past, and shape it in all phases. I may intend to hunt the beast tomorrow, but I may also sanctify it as an inaccessible animal in principle. In this way, I tame the wild animal, which does not preclude the fact that its unavailability is given to me as an unavailability available. It is not longer this piece of rock, but rather a surface that shows something different. The view goes through the wall, and in going through my desiring tendency, receives a new space of actualization, in principle to infinity. In stretching my will from here to there, without leaving my here, I extend my ability to move to there, by means of imagination or by imaginative temporalization. The presentation of the not really present animal and the transparency of the wall are two related factors of a temporalization of the real made possible by imagination. Another sample for stretching the will is the burial cult, which is an attempt to prolong life beyond life. Burial objects, even the reproduction of entire housing estates, have the purpose of overcoming the real power of death. Imaginary objects based on real objects in a real space override the ultimate reality of death and create a new temporality with their own imaginary space. The will to attain immortality transfers the bodily corporeal existence anchored in the here to an endlessly distant there. And finally, founding a city is also a kind of overriding reality, a real space, through the use of imaginary means whereby the superstructure of the city creates forms of its own temporality, such as the temporal coordination of the city's life world or the genealogies of the noble persons, priests and rulers of that settlement. In all these cases, imagination transforms real entities in order to liberate itself from them and to build its own organization, prevailing over real spaces by establishing spaces of temporalization. In this way, new living spaces called worlds are created, in which human beings begin to settle. However, these concrete cases of being in the world, of the being in number two, have two chasms. They underlie of my desiring tendency formed by my natural egocentrism, that is being in one, on the one side, and the real which transcends me absolutely on the other. Here we can set up our third thesis, which claims that there are two possible reactions to that which absolutely transcends me. Either I will stow it in my house, intensifying my natural egocentric attitude, or I let the doors open, not trying in any way to capture the absolute. Forming a world by imaginary means, a world as being in the world, what we called being in number two, does not redeem the first being in of our bodily corporeal existence, as we have seen. However, when this first being in is not only not disabled, but works further in the underground of the social world, then its essential character of natural egocentrism remains in function. And moreover, it finds a new field of activity. Thus, a social world as such is in no way a guarantee to overcoming egocentrism. On the contrary, egocentric perspectivism remains not only in the individual human being, but egocentric wills can join their forces and turn into a common egocentric style, an egocentrism of a group, such as the egocentric attitude of a political party or a nation. Therefore, the social cohesion of a world is always at risk, and the reason is not only that groups are splitting off, but that the single individual existence also remains egocentric in the social sphere and normally still intensifies and radicalizes its egocentric attitude. The characteristic feature of egocentrism is first to live in one's perspective view, and secondly to consider this view to be universally valid. In the context of a social world being in two, this leads to the tendency that the world in which one participates will be that absolute. And that means that one makes the world itself, the world of the middle, absolute. The consequence of this is that the really absolute is no longer in view as such. It has been, so to speak, downloaded into the familiar home world. Our attention to it as a truly absolute has been lost. On the other hand, the domesticated absolute acts as an absolute to this world and thus intensifies the egocentric trait of itself and its members. Egocentric access to reality in general and to the absolute takes place, as we have seen, in the transcendence of the bodily corporeal 0 point. The egocentric orientation runs from here to there. It relates to the absolute and constitutes the world. In this sense, world formation is already egocentrically grounded, as is an egocentric orientation toward the absolute from here, my located existence. Egocentrism is intensified where I accept its tendency and set myself up in its extension. Human cultural history knows two great stages in which such acceptance takes place. Its structural principles can be described as the magic and the mythic. The magical meets wherever I focus on something to take possession of it. It is clearly demonstrated in painted prehistoric caves. It is a one-line targeted orientation towards something, in a word, the focus of the hunter. In contrast, the mythical creates a world, its own world, with its own cyclic time and space grounded on the real territory the social group has defined for itself. It is not by chance that settlements and first city foundations radicalized the mythical potential of human existence. However, such mythical potential occurs already in cultures of hunters and collectors, as well as in nomadic and semi-nomadic societies. Locations like the painted caves were obviously the first centers where people met regularly in order to hold religious ceremonies. Such recurring series of events and their repeated rites are the beginnings of a mythical world that transforms the earlier stage of a magic relation to reality. On the other hand, the magical remains within the mythical as transformed by the latter. Thus, the brutality of its unconditional desire is preserved even in the context of the mythic. This raw force is directed towards the fortified isolation of a mythical world that circles itself within itself. With the means of the imagination, the mythical expands an area that tries to close itself off to all others that could penetrate it from the outside. Furthermore, Certain acts express the magical directly. These include all conjuring practices and interpretation of divine omens, etc. It is said that the Latin word religious means precisely this, an accurate consideration of divine signs. So the mythical world encompasses and combines both the magic will to dominate as a mode of self-protection and the mythical endeavor to demarcate and close off a world of life within oneself. If the unavailable was the animal to be killed by the prehistoric hunter, it is the climatic conditions for the settled farmer. Both animals on the one hand, rain, lightning, and thunder on the other, are of a divine nature, but both have got their divinity correlative to the egocentric desires of those who want to make the still unavailable available. In this sense, in the mythical world, the divine is captured, confined, encircled by and within a city. City cultures model the heaven of the gods in continuation of their domestic orders, whereby God will be fixed in the finite. Divine supremacy enters into the service of self-empowerment. When a city culture says, "That is my God," then it has egocentrically appropriated the absolute. The next step is to make this appropriation absolute, which means I claim that my God is the only true God for all. Of course, that the absolute becomes a finite one has to do with its visualization. We all know that to form an image of God is to include the absolute in a finite entity. And yet, this is not the crucial point when it comes to describing the fact of setting the divine as finite. What is decisive here is rather the correlative, subjective way in which the divine appears. It is my grab that wants to possess the absolute, to seize what is most difficult to grasp. It is the actualization of my egocentric position, which still wants to acquire the unavailable. And in doing so, I am not referring to the unavailable absolute as such, but in reality to the object of my desire. I mirror myself in myself, in the wrong opinion that I have met the divine itself. To form an image of the divine then means to form an image of oneself. This is a motive for the action of an iconoclasm, as there are many examples from human history. However, the problem is that iconoclastic actions miss the real reason of idolatry. By remaining oriented to the results, products, namely the images, they also terminate in the object and do not change the way to refer to the absolute. From this point of view, it does not matter whether an image is deified or destroyed as not really divine. Although the iconoclast claims that the divine is not present in the image, he does not show that the problem is not the visualization, but the egocentric attitude. And as long as he merely opposes a non-image to the image, he does not change this attitude, but proceeds egocentrically himself. However, if the egocentric basic trait remains in force, which has spanned the world of the middle with its gods, then the iconoclasm certainly does not realize an interruption of the world-forming imagination. In this sense, the iconoclasm realizes only a relative end of the imagination or the imaginative, and cases in which the egocentric trait is in force in relation to the absolute can be called egocentric theism. Against this backdrop, the emergence of monotheistic religions could perhaps be better understood. That the many gods, as a projection of domestic life into the absolute, are eliminated can be seen as an indication of leaving the world of practical purpose actions. The divine thus receives a place that stands at a greater distance from that middle world. It becomes more independent of human access. On the other hand, if one succeeds in making this one God inclined for himself, one attains all the greater certainty and security. In this respect, the monotheistic model is indifferent. It can detach itself from egocentric interdependencies, but can also have a sublimated effect on them and reinforce them. It is therefore a semi-centric theism. Our final thoughts are on the following question. Can there be non-egocentric relations to the absolute? In order to find answers to this question, we can refer to a few selected examples of religious experience. This is not about the religious context of these experiences, but about the structure of this experiencing. Of course, there are indeed cases of interrupted egocentric movement. One example is a reversed perspective as found in icon representations of Orthodox Catholicism. Here, the perspective representation no longer proceeds from me as the absolute reference point of the visual field, that is, not from the absolute 0 point from which the world unfolds for me. Instead, the perspective structure is reversed. It is no longer I who looks into the world and grasps the absolute, but God looks at me, meets me in the finiteness of my bodily corporeal existence. Using the means of pictorial representation, the icon's reversed perspective describes an overcoming of the subject-related image. In other words, within the imaginative, an imaginative structure is rebuilt, a structure that concerns a certain orientation of subjective life and, with the help of the imaginative, reverses the direction of this life, that is contrary to its egocentric intentionality. The egocentric orientation was rendered powerless by the fact that the movement no longer runs from here to there, but from there to here. It is a reversal of the magical, intentional act, and thus the criterion of whether in a religious experience such a moment really arrives, which exceeds both the experience and its experiencer. For example, the shaman may be a dazzler, a deceiver, or indeed seized by an absolute power. In the former case, his or her egocentric intention functions. In the latter case, it is disabled, not by him or her, but by the experience itself. The interruption of reversal of the movement of an egocentrically organized life seems to be a decisive criterion for the abolition of its egocentric tendency in general. It may also be found at the core of revelation experiences, and just this turn, this reversal, might be the innermost sense of a conversion experience. The egocentric attitude may, however, return in and go where a doctrine is formulated on the basis of revelation. Nonetheless, such experience of the absolute based on a reversal of the egocentric posture can be described as a decentralized theism. One of the most radical solutions can be found in Buddhism and Zen Buddhism respectively. It is radical in the sense that the Satori experience is not only a reversal of the egocentric perspective orientation, but also a complete dissolution of the egocentric attitude. This is neither the appropriation of an external absolute, the movement from here to there, nor the breaking in of the absolute itself into the imaginative world in the middle of human existence, from there to here. The specific situation here is that the capacity of orienting itself, which spans a world so that imaginative power can test itself on it, is rendered non-functional. And when the screen of the world folds up, there is nothing more that can appear on it. However, discussing absolute nothingness does not only mean the absence of things to which I could refer, which could be objects of my desire. Rather, it means a dissolution of the ground on which things first become relevant to me, and that means the inhibition of my egocentric orientation. When human existence is brought back to its absolute zero point in this way, the focus shifts to this zero point as the original source of self-presenting life. For the founder of the Kyoto school, Nishida Kitaro, the true reality character of our life, his words, lies in the present now. We live from the bottom of the absolute, he states. This resistive real is experienced in the moment you live, because this now is both living and dying. One dies by thinking a moment, and one lives because space is made for the next moment. If one makes sure that one now follows the next, continuity is emphasized. And if one focuses on the extinction of one moment, the discontinuous is stressed. But this is in the service of continuity, since without an extinction of the present now, a new now cannot occur. The absolute nothingness is therefore this discontinuous, continuous movement as a reality in which the subjective is pure as such. Nishitani Keiichi, a later representative of the Kyoto school, thus calls absolute nothingness not merely thought nothingness, but nothingness that can only be lived and experienced. It is always lived, but in daily life experiencing it is not normally accepted as such. It is only when the screen of the world collapses that, as Nishitani remarks, an opening of the absolute nothing as an existential reversal occurs, as a movement that departs from the mode of being of the person-centered person. This is a special case in which the absolute literally happens in the here and now, in the presenting of the life that we ourselves are. Insofar as we realize this absolute as such, only when we inhibit the imaginative world of the middle, there is no transcendence here. Thus, Buddhism or Zen Buddhism is not at all theism. Here we have reached the absolute end of the imaginative, or, if you like, its real beginning, where its world-forming activity is just about to start. Thank you very much.
I'm wondering about the relationship between the egological and the non-egological. And I'm thinking about the fact that we are born from our mothers and spend our first 9 months in the womb, and we grow up and develop a sense of self through the other. And so I'm wondering, how does that affect the imagination? I know this is completely out from left field, but I wonder if you had thought about that aspect of our development of selfhood and the ecological.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this question. This is a very important question because it relates to the relationship of what I call being in one and being in two. And of course, this is a kind of analyzing what is in reality altogether, so to say. Because when we wake up, we are waking up in sociality, of course. But at the same time, we are separated animals in the way Levinas is describing this in the first chapters of his Totalité Infinie, the separated existence. So, of course, the question is when we develop from an early stage as a baby, what happens? What is the role of imagination? Of course, the role imagination functions in a social world, I think. And so we have maybe, in fact, the very interesting case that there are two forces that determine me. The first force is my real existence, when I eat, when I sleep, when I drink, and so on. This is a separated existence, as a being in one. And the other thing is the being in the world. And this is the place where the imaginative power is on work, I think. So we have to consider both stages. But in fact, in the real existence, both is all together, of course. So we have to separate it by our analysis. And let me make a footnote for Heidegger. Heidegger only knows being in world two, I think. He has no body, no philosophy of the body. So maybe it is a little bit an answer to your question. I'm not sure, but maybe.
Okay, next question, please.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. Maybe this follows up a little bit with James's question, but both in the theistic perspective and in the Buddhist perspective, it seems to me there's a community of people involved. Mysticism and religious experience is mediated through communities, which also involve critique of mystical experiences, such that egocentrism that might take over and dominate a particular religious perspective can also be criticized within a community where people will say this is inauthentic in a sense.
Yes, thank you. Of course. But the experience itself, the Satori experience, is also an experience absolutely isolated. This can I do only by myself. Nobody can help me. It functions or not. And then the result can be controlled by others. This is right, of course. And there is a community from the beginning on. This is also right. But there's a very close moment, so to say. And this is a decisive moment to get the Satori experience. And nobody can help you. No one. This is addressed to your separated existence.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And I would like to ask about a slightly methodological question about the role of overcoming egocentrism. That means, how far is it good to explain religion by means of overcoming something? Because when it's overcome, then what then? So you have a perspective where religion ends. That means if all of us would be able to overcome our egocentric position, then we close the churches and it's done. So I'm wondering about, because there was this problem about the freedom. It means there is freedom from something, and freedom towards something. So when Isaiah Berlin wrote his famous essay, and I think also this explanation of religion, so somehow overcoming something is, I think, the negative aspect where we are settled in the world and now we are overcoming the problems which we inherited from our childhood. But I think it should be somehow drawn towards the positive aspect, that the freedom towards something. So religion not as overcoming something, that religion as opening. Maybe you just reformulate or rephrase the way how you did it. So maybe it's not an important point, but still I think it should be, the religion should be captured in a way of liberating us towards something and not overcoming some other things. So
thank you very much. You are right. I did not speak about love, for example. This would be another chapter, I think. I spoke only about egocentrism. So this is only one chapter. But the main point is, I will not say, the easy tableau would be, on the one side we have an egocentrism, on the other side we have it not. We have put it out of work or whatever. But I think this is not the real situation, because we have what I call the natural egocentrism. We have our bodily corporeal existence is in such way that we perspectively experience the environment around us. So we cannot delay this. We cannot become angels, for example. So to avoid egocentrism, or to avoid to make it absolute, is an endless way of work. So it is not so that we have a theory and we can also the Satori experience. I think it is maybe it is a first when it works. It is a first deep experience, but it would be false when we are wrong, when we think now all is done and we have nothing more to do. So I think it is a struggle, a lifelong struggle to fight against our egocentrism. So there are a lot of stages, and I tried to analyze some factual religions against this backdrop of modes of egocentrism.
Thank you for your very stimulating talk. And I wanted to ask you, what kind of absolute do you find in Aztecs or Mixtecs? Or you had the interesting slide where you compared pantheon from ancient Greece and the South American pantheon. What's the absolute there?
What is the absolute?
In the South American pantheon, what kind of absolute do you posit in that religion?
For example, in Greek, old Greek religion? Or?
No, not Greek, but Aztec or Mixtec. That's one question. Yeah. And then another question, which is along the same line. The Greek deities that you showed, that was a polytheistic pantheon. So there was a concept of absolute, of course, in Parmenides and in philosophy. But I'm kind of accustomed to think those two as rather separate, because by the time when the pantheon was developed the way you were showing it, I think that the idea of absolute and polytheistic ideas were divested. So the point that I'm trying to make is that perhaps we can become a little bit more situated in historical contexts, because I don't think all of them have the absolute. For example, in Zoroastrian history, there are forms of dualism which do not entail any kind of absolute or unity, foundational metaphysical dualism that we don't have any analogues to, etc. So I think that we should be just a little bit more maybe situating and cubing generalizations That's just an idea. But the Aztec slide is of course most seminal, pivotal in that. Because I just don't know they had any concept of the absolute. I think that they were just polytheistic people. I may be wrong.
I think that the point was for me the coherence between polytheistic religion on the one side and settlement of the other. So a settlement, a human settlement, a city or not a nomadic, for example, not nomadic people, and not a social group of hunters and collectors. So I think this both belongs together. On the one side, polytheistic heaven and a specific society that is a settled society. So we can see, you saw the photo of Göbekli Tepe. This is the specialist today. I think it is a correspondence between the polytheistic heaven and the working society. So it is a very practical background. There's a god of rain, for example. It is, of course, it belongs to a farmer who is waiting for the rain. And the gods are, and you can see also in the case of the Greek pantheon,